about is how to bring that virala to sarala, how to make that virala sarala. And how to do that is through three ways I had told you. One is love, which what Casey mentioned, that I have to love that object of contemplation more than I love the world. If I love the world more, then it's going to be very hard for me to sit and contemplate. So one is definitely love. Second one is what we call abhyasa or practice. So we also talked about when we keep practicing it, it becomes easier. So the more we practice, the easier it becomes, because it becomes like a vasana. You become so used to it that when you sit in a certain place in a certain time, your mind can just go to that same direction. The third point, how to make it virala to sarala, we saw is the purity of my transactional life or my daily living. If my daily living was pretty peaceful and thoughtful and alert, then I can sit down nicely and contemplate on that object of contemplation. However, if there were some mistakes I made, or if I was careless, or if I'm very disturbed, that will also affect my contemplation. So, here in this verse, so we went from puja to japa to dhyana. So, it's very structured. And from that dhyana, we went from sarala, which is broken, from virala, from virala, which is broken, to sarala, which is unbroken. And the examples he gives are ajya dharaya, like the flow of ghee, which is very, very steady, but at the same time, srotas, like the river, which is effortlessly flowing. So these two examples are given. Now, today, he's going to talk about, we talked about the procedure of contemplation, virala versus sarala. Today, he's going to talk about the object of contemplation. There are two objects, different objects of contemplation that we can have. So let us see here, verse number 8. I will chant and then you can repeat. Bheda bhavanat sohamityaso Bhavana vida pavani mata. Okay, together. Bheda bhavana sohamityaso bhavana vida pavani mata. Okay, so what he says here is Bheda bhavana. The word bhavana here means dhyana, means contemplation. Bheda means difference. Bheda bhavanat. Then contemplation with a difference. Soham iti asau. So aham means saha, that aham, that I am. Asau, this contemplation, which is bhavana abhida, which is without any difference or without any duality. Pavani mata. It is considered mata pavani, the holiest or the supreme purifier. Pavani means purifier. So, with regards to the way of contemplating, there are two. There is one which is called virala, there is one which is called sarala. With regards to the object of contemplation, there are two. One is called bheda bhavana, with a difference, abheda bhavana or abhida bhavana, without a difference. What are these two things? When we talk about contemplation with a difference, it means that I am contemplating on a form of God who is different from me. So it is very much like the wave contemplating on an ocean. So I take a form of God and I contemplate on that form of God. So I close my eyes, I think about that form of God, and I think that that God is separate from me. I am the contemplator, that God is what I am contemplating upon. And it may be that I think about the form of that God, Or it may also be that I think about the symbol of that god. For example, the Shivalinga of Bhagavan Shiva or the Shaligrama of Bhagavan Vishnu. Or it may also be what we call Aham Graho Upasana, wherein I contemplate on the God in me. So these are three things. Okay. So one thing is you contemplate on the symbol, like Linga, Shalagrama. Another thing is you contemplate on the form, whether it's Devi, whether it's Ganesha. The third thing is you contemplate on that God in you, that you physically see that that God is here and you're contemplating on that God here in you, which we call Aham Graho Upasana. These three things still constitute what we call contemplation with duality. Because although we are contemplating, we feel that separateness with God. And this is what we call Bheda Bhavana. Now, what is Abheda Bhavana? Abheda Bhavana is when we contemplate without duality. What do you mean? Sa'a aham, that I am, which means it is contemplating on the Mahavakyas or the great statements of the Upanishads that I am that pure awareness. So there is nothing separate from me. You can say it's the water understanding his or her own real nature. It's not like the wave contemplating on the ocean, but the water understanding its own real nature, that I am that. And how is that done? That is done through those great statements called Mahavakyas. So whether we say Aham Brahmasmi, I am Brahman, or whether we say I am pure awareness, or whether we say I am that, but it is contemplating on that. So both at this level should be what we call sarala, but the objects are different. Now the question becomes, which is better? Which is better? And he says, Pavani Mata, that which is contemplating without duality, without difference, that is better. Why? Because it's purer. Why is it purer? Because it's the truth. It's the truth. That's who we really are. And at the end of the day, we are meant to see that the essence of God is the essence of me. It's one and the same thing. But now a question may come, where should I start? So we should start wherever we feel comfortable. We shouldn't think, okay, because Abheda Bhavana is Pavani Mata, then I should go for that. The main thing is what holds your mind. And this is what we also talked about before. We have to see what is it that can hold your and my mind. And if it starts with a form, if it starts with separateness, that's completely fine. In its own way, in and through time, with our study of Vedanta, it will come to that non dual truth. And it is in this way that really bhakti and jnana are one. You know, some people always talk about bhakti and jnana, they're like two separate things. From the sadhana level, they seem separate because bhakti's sadhana is puja, japa, chintanam. The sadhana or the means for jnana is shravanam, mananam, nididhyasanam. Bhakti seems to involve a lot of duality. Jnana is non duality. But if you look at their culmination point, the highest bhakti, which is what we will see in the next verse, the highest bhakti is actually non dual truth. Why? Because what is love? Love is when I identify with something, when I identify with someone. And when is that identification complete? When I lose myself in that person. Hmm? Identification is not complete when I love you, but I still feel a separateness. When I lose myself in that person or in that being, then identification is complete. And that losing ourselves in that, that is called jnana. So from the highest standpoint, bhakti and jnana are actually one the same thing. Now, this is very beautifully brought out by our Hanumanji. One time, Bhagavan Rama asked him, "What are you to me?" And he said, "Deha buddhya dasoham." Whenever I am identified with my body, whenever I feel like I'm this body, then I see myself as your servant. I see you as my master. But when I have jiva buddhi, when I think that I am this individual, twadamshaka, I think that I am a part of you. I am very limited, but you are unlimited. I am very small, but you are infinite. But Atma Buddhya, when I am contemplating on the self and on the truth, then I know that you and I are the same. You and I are one. Twameva aham. That you and I are one. So this is the language, or this is the way a Vedantin thinks in these terms. So it's not that you cannot apply both buddhis, both types of thinking. In our deep seat of contemplation, we always remember that we are one with that ultimate truth. But in and through our vyavahara, we can be as we are a devotee of Lord. So, two types of contemplation we saw, Virala and Sarala. Of Virala and Sarala, take Sarala. Then on Sarala, the object of contemplation is different. One is Bheda Bhavana, one is Abheda Bhavana. One is with a difference, one is without a difference. Slowly, slowly, what to do? Make our way to without that difference. And Arjuna asks this very same question to Lord Sri Krishna in chapter 12. He says, "You talk about contemplating on God, but should I contemplate on God with form or without form?" And what does Lord Krishna say? Lord Krishna says, "You please think about where you are." To contemplate on God without form is very difficult because it requires a very subtle mind. To contemplate on God with form is much easier. Where are you in your life? You start from there and you slowly make your way up. Now the question becomes that now I've made my way to contemplating on the non-dual self, on that Mahavakya, on those great statements. Is that the utmost? Is that the last? So he says there is something deeper, and that gets moved to what we call samadhi. So this is the next verse now. I will read, we will talk a little bit about it, and then we will continue this next week. Okay? Verse number 9. Bhava shunya sat bhava sustitihi bhavana balad bhaktiruttama. Okay, together. Bhava shunya sat bhava sustitihi bhavana balad bhaktiruttama. So we will just see the simple meaning of this verse, because I would like to discuss with you after this documentary. Hopefully we all watched. Here he says bhavana balat. Bala means the strength. Bhavana, by the strength of the contemplation. Which contemplation? Contemplation without duality. By that strength, what happens? Sadbhava sustitihi. Sustitihi. One gains firm abidance in sadbhava, in that principle of sat. So by that strength of that contemplation on non-duality, one gains abidance on sat. And then what happens? Bhava shunya. One becomes devoid of thought. Bhava shunya. Shunya means devoid of bhava, thought. And this is bhakti uttama. This is the ultimate bhakti. So what is the ultimate bhakti? In verse number 8, it is that focusing on the first week on verse number 7, bhakti, how it grows, how it gradually grows. Verse number 7, it is single pointed focus, the single pointed focus on the same kind of thought. In verse number 8, what kind of thought? The thought on the non-dual self. And then in verse number 9, what happens there? We move from thought to thoughtlessness, and that movement is called uttama bhakti. Because slowly, slowly, when focus becomes intense, what happens is absorption. With focus, there's a lot of effort that we put in. We are saying these things in 3 verses, but this really takes a lifetime to do, huh? It takes a lot of practice. It's not something that happens so easy. We're nicely saying it in 3 verses. But when that focus becomes intense and when we keep practicing, that absorption automatically happens. And that is bhava shunya, no thoughts. And in that, there is supreme abidance in that non dual self. And that is ultimate bhakti. All right. So, more of what this is, we will see next week.